I want to read for you a passage from Galatians chapter 6. These are two of my favorite verses in the entire New Testament. I just think they're so rich, and there's one part of it I want to focus in on today. But we're in Galatians chapter 6. I'm going to begin reading in verse 9. Let us not become weary in doing good. I'm going to read that again. Let us not become weary in doing good. For at the proper time we will reap a harvest if we do not give up. Therefore, as we have opportunity, let us do good to all people, especially to those who belong to the family of believers. I have wrestled with this for my entire adult life. Why does it say especially to the household of faith? And a couple years ago, I think I rounded the corner and sort of figured it out. So for the early part of my ministry, we had the opportunity to be part of churches that had lots of college connections and young people, and then they would get married, and so we'd have young couples, and then we'd have young families, and it was just this constant, and they'd be inviting their friends, and their friends would say, I've never heard of a church like this, and we had no problem reaching people, right? It was just a natural outcome of who we had come together. And then as we moved to different churches, we've come up with different challenges, and each location that I've been in has come with its own challenge. Because it was for the first time in my life I had ever been appointed to a church that was having trouble attracting new people. And I figured out that one of the reasons it's super important to be gracious and kind to those who are part of your family is that if you want people who are currently not a part of your family to come and join you, if you don't treat each other very well in the house, no one wants to come and be a part of that house. Does that make sense? It's really weird because you would think, if you've read the Christian New Testament, you would think that it would say, especially to those who aren't a part of the faith yet. That would make so much sense, right? Do good to all, but especially those who are on the outside. That would make way more sense than the way it is here to me. This always throws me off a little bit, which is do good to all as you have opportunity, but especially to those who you share a house with, who you share a name, a family name with. And it's because if you don't treat each other very well, it's a tough sell to ask others to come and participate, because when they see bickering and conflict and crisis, and it's not a great invitation to say, hey, you should totally come and join this. And they're like, I think I'm good. There's other things I can do, right, with my time, talent, and treasure. It's not a great invite. So I've come up with a little list. By the way, if you are somebody who likes to follow along, on the end of each row, there are some outlines. I've come up with a list. So I was raised a pastor's kid, and I've been in ministry for almost 30 years, and I've noticed some things that seem to work well for taking care of one another in grace. And so I've come up with a little list. I want to present that list to you, and then we'll have a time of reflection, and you can add to the list if you want to. So I talked about why especially the household of faith, and I think it's because of this reputational thing. So here are the best ideas I have found for treating each other well when you share the same house of worship, all right? The first one comes out of Matthew chapter 18. In Matthew 18, Jesus says, hey, if somebody has offended you or sinned against you, right, if you have a problem with somebody, here's the sequence of how to handle this. Number one, go to them. That's number one, go to them. And if you can win them over, you've kept the circle small and the deal is done, right? And no one else had to even know something had happened. So that's number one, go to them. If they won't listen to you, then you can go get someone else, and maybe that person can come and be a mediator and can help you, right? Navigate between the two of you. And then if that doesn't work, then you can bring this problem to the household of faith. Make it a part of the bigger community. I love the Matthew 18 principle because it keeps it small. What I see most of the time is the opposite of the Matthew 18 principle, which is when you're upset at somebody, or they've offended you, or they've sinned against you, the first thing you do is go to 7 other people and see if they've done the same to them. I'm stepping on some toes here, maybe. I apologize, but you should get them out of the aisle. I might be stepping on your toes here. If you go to 7 other people and say, has that person ever done that to you? Right? And then you find a group, right, an affinity group, that all agrees that that person's in the wrong, and then you as a group go to them and say, I've been talking with people, and we all agree you're a jerk. Right? And then afterwards, the person said, hey, can you and I just talk about this? So in our culture, if we're not careful, we do the opposite of the Matthew 18 principle. Instead of going to the person first, then finding somebody else to come, right, and help, and then taking it to the larger group, we go to the larger group first, then we narrow it down to a party that goes for an intervention, and then we have the one-on-one. And I just think the Matthew 18 sequence is the best. So, if we did nothing else this morning except commit to doing the Matthew 18 principle, we would be so much healthier than many other organizations and families and cultures and neighborhoods, right? Matthew 18 to me is genius. Side note, as I have lived into Matthew 18 over the last couple decades, one of the things I have figured out is there's a way to do Matthew 18 that's even one notch up, which is this. And I know this is going to be hard for some of you to hear. Don't say anything about someone you haven't said to them. Okay? Now, let me tell you what I said, and then I'm going to tell you what a lot of people hear. What I said is, don't say anything about someone you haven't said to them. What people hear is, don't say anything about someone that you wouldn't say to them. That's not it. It's not that if they asked, I would tell them. No, listen, here's the thing. Don't say something about someone that you have not said to them. Not theoretically, practically. It is the hardest thing I've ever tried to live by, because if you're anything like me, sometimes it feels so good to say something about someone to somebody else and for them to affirm it. And you go, we're right, aren't we? There's something so satisfying and equally so difficult about going to that person and saying, hey, can we talk for a second? That's really tough thing to do, is to say something to somebody. It's so much easier to say it about them. So for me, that's the Matthew 18 principle taken up a notch, even still. So, it's a tough one to live by. I try, and I can't do it all the time. It's really tough principle to live by. All right. Second category I want to introduce is nothing negative by email. Email is one of those things that sometimes, especially late at night, it can be easy to get ahead of steam, and so momentum build up, and somehow a little note about, hey, I didn't appreciate this today, or something I've been thinking about, becomes a diatribe that has to be booked in chapters. Right? I don't know if you've ever received an email like this. First thing, by the way, whenever I get a multi-page email, the very first thing I do is check the timestamp on when it was sent. And I'll be honest, it's usually after 9, almost always after 11. Somebody's upset about something, and you sort of stew about it all day, and then you get ahead of steam, and you fire off this email at night. So I've had to develop a principle that says nothing negative by email. So we use email to set up meetings, not to say what we would have said at the meeting, right? So we email the person and say, hey, any chance we can get together Wednesday at 10? I've got something I want to talk to you about. Because this goes back to Matthew 18, right? It gives the person a chance to keep the circle small and to deal with the issue before it becomes a public spectacle. So nothing negative by email. Another principle I found that's really good is the first and the last and then some percentages. So some people are not good at math, but this is one of those things that as a group dynamic, if you're on a committee or you're part of a Bible study or a Sunday school that we're starting this fall, if you're always the first to talk, that's not good for the group dynamic, right? So we have to take turns being the first to wade in. But we also have to take turns being the last, because otherwise a group dynamic forms where everybody will like sort of share their opinion of what they think, but they know that there's this person who has the final word and is either going to synthesize the whole thing or they're going to say, no, this is the direction we're going. So one of the things I like to do is just to teach people to count. So if you're in a group, say even out to lunch this afternoon, or a part of a book group, or whatever it is, if there are 4 people in the group, generally, you want to do about 25% of the talking, right? If you only do 10 or 5%, right, well, there might be a really opinionated person in the group who's very talkative, and they talk at 80 or 90% of the time, right? So you just want to do some math. If there's 4 of us, we should generally be speaking about 25% of the time, and it would be good if we took turns who talks first and who talks last. Now, at first, this might feel really regimented and very like stiff and calculated, but I promise you, in all the years I've been doing it, it has borne so much fruit to encourage, to create a dynamic where A, we're all going to share, and B, we can't always have the same person always setting the agenda by going first, but neither can we have the same person always speaking the last word. We have to share the responsibility in whatever it is, whether it's a book group or a committee or whatever it is, right? Just do a little bit of math. You know the saying, in every group there's a person who needs a little extra grace, and if you don't know who that is, it's probably you. You heard that? This math thing solves that problem. Instead of that person standing out and everyone sort of bracing themselves that they're either always going to go first or they're going to go last or they're going to take up all the airspace, by doing some simple math, it is a grace, a gift of grace to that person to let them off the hook. Whether they have anxiety or they're feeling pressure or they're agitated or maybe they're just unaware. But it is a grace to them to get them out of that rut they're in. Because what happens if you're not careful is people start avoiding that person, right? But what we're talking about is to be kind, to do good to all, and especially those we share a house of worship with. So we want to be extra aware and put in some very simple procedures so that everybody gets included, everybody gets to participate, and that we don't marginalize or push someone to the boundary because we'd rather avoid some awkwardness than deal with it, all right? So it's basic math. And then my last one is this. When there is conflict, or let's say in any relationship, usually the door swings both ways. I always like when there's the hotel rooms that have the shared door, right? You can each lock it from your side, right? And so one of the things that I like to encourage people to do is, hey, in any relationship, there's a shared door. As much as it is possible, without you getting injured, right? We don't want anyone to be hurt, right, in this toxic relationship because they somehow feel like the martyr because, as a Christian, they don't want to cut this person off, okay? So I'm saying, as far as you can without getting injured, leave the door unlocked on your side. Now, that other person can deal with their stuff on their side. They can cut you off. They can block you on Facebook. They can delete your number out of their phone. That's on them. But to whatever degree you can leave the door unlocked on your side so that if they would ever want to heal things up or even just make sure you know their side of the story, that if they reached out to you in grace, you would be available to them. because you have left the door unlocked on your side, right? Now, acknowledge there are circumstances where a person is in such an unhealthy place that sometimes we need to close off from them in order so that we don't continue to be injured. We all have that. But I think it's just a good principle to say that when there's conflict, and there is in every relationship, to whatever degree it's possible for you to leave the door unlocked on your side, be available in waiting in grace so that if they were to reach out to you, you would be there for them if you can. Other people can cut off relationships, right? We just don't want to be the ones, as much as possible, that are ending relationships. We want to extend grace as far as we can without it costing us something central to our own safety. So those are the gifts of grace that I have found. And what I'm going to ask Brenda to do is play us the song that we sang earlier. She's going to play it for us and give us a time to reflect. And then Cooper, who's our liturgist today, is going to come and lead us in a little time of reflection.